This is just a video on my ideology about weightlifting and mass building specifically. I believe in following a 4-day split, 2 days on, 1 day off. If you have increased muscle protein synthesis, natural or unnaturally, you can obviously push it for a higher frequency. In my opinion, the biggest drivers for hypertrophy are stimulus, consistency, and amino acid levels in blood. A stimulus is going to be anything that performs work, resistance, or tension. I believe depending on the muscle body being trained, both resistance and tension are best for overall development. For compound lifts, I believe leaning away from tension and going for resistance is better, as compound lifts usually require stabilization from other muscle bodies, or simply isometrically involve other muscles. A great example of this being the overhead press. Using the resistance bands at the top range of motion, you could easily bring your hands together, losing anterior delta activation, putting emphasis on the triceps. With a barbell, you have fixed hand positioning, and that issue isn't going to occur. Secondly, as another example with overhead press, using a barbell overhead press, you have to stabilize your core. You have to stabilize your pelvis. Kind of give your quads a good little flex just to keep everything tight while you're actually overhead pressing. In regards to when to use resistance bands, I think using them as isolated or accessory lifts are going to be best. Using a single-handed resistance band is going to give you a constant line of pull, and it's not going to allow you to drift inward or outward. Depending on your feet positioning, your band should be a direct line of pull directly down to the floor. So generally bands are great, but they should be accessory or secondary lifts stacked with your basic compound resistance lifts, if you consider them. The number 2 is consistency in the form of changing routines, following through with committing to the gym and consistently tracking your progression in some fashion, and also keeping to a routine for a set time period are going to get more results than anyone who isn't consistent. Consistency on compound lifts far outweigh isolated lifts. A great example is when people try to PR on, let's say, an incline bench when it's not really a compound lift. So, just using that as an example. Number 3 is amino acid levels in blood. Using the peer-reviewed paper, Macronutrient Considerations for the Sport of Bodybuilding, published in the Sports Medicine Journal in 2012 by Charles Lampert, found that during the off-season, it was always advantageous for bodybuilders to be in a positive energy balance, so that extra energy is available for muscle metabolism. And for 6 to 12 weeks prior to competition, bodybuilders attempt to retain mass and reduce body fat to very low levels. During the pre-contest phase, bodybuilders should be in a negative energy balance so that body fat can be oxidized, but they also need to have a high protein intake to maintain that muscle mass, and that is because at a certain point, the body may start consuming the free amino acids in the blood instead of using them as building blocks. This is why some protein powder formulations are special compared to others. All of them are pointless. So basically, if you eat a whole protein, let's say red meat or fish, it takes upwards of 2 days to fully metabolize to fully break it down. So if you're an individual who has a proper diet, who takes no protein powder, if you work out, you are still metabolizing your meal from the night before or the breakfast in the previous. No matter what, you should still have food metabolizing, increasing amino acid free content in the blood. The only problem with this is people who are going to have an artificial protein synthesis, either through artificial means or naturally. There are some people who will have some natural tendency to gain mass or gain power more than even some people who lift unnaturally. But these people it's literally going to be like 0.001%. I'm not even I wouldn't even consider myself close to that. Like, I'm a small average dude. So if you want to take in protein powder, the thing is they digest in an hour and a half to an hour. If you have enough amino acids in your blood already, enough amino acid content, you really don't need additional amino acids. You're not going to suddenly use more of the building blocks. As long as the building blocks are present within the blood, it's going to build. There are some people, once again, where it's going to be advantageous for them to take in protein powder. If they're on a cut, they're obviously going to want to maintain a higher amino acid content in their blood at all times. In regards to the way protein powders work, though, there's different metabolized versions of it, different formulations, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. So it's basically concentrates, isolates, and hydrolyzed. The concentrate breaks down in an hour and a half and is absolutely fine for everybody. You don't need any of the other crap. Unless you have a lactose intolerance, and then I'd say you can go with an isolate. Hydrolyzed is literally going to be for people who have muscle wasting diseases or literally are in a severe amino acid deficiency. As because it's hydrolyzed, it's going to absorb roughly 55 minutes. It's going to be very extremely quick absorption, which is going to be basically unnecessary for 99.9% of individuals. Now, once again, if you're an unnatural lifter who's lifting competitively at a very extremely heavy level, then using a hydrolyzed protein powder directly after a routine would actually possibly be very beneficial, as the very short time frame until the amino acid spike in the blood occurs would be beneficial, would be considered a slight beneficial edge. Now, is there going to be an edge between taking normal concentrate and hydrolyzed? Most likely not. It's literally going to be an extra 45 minutes to break down the concentrate. Worst case scenario, eat properly and just take a protein shake after your workout. Even if you're unnatural, you're going to still have more than enough amino acids to rebuild and gain mass. So jumping into something completely a little bit different, this is going to be about tendon growth and tendon ligaments. They're unvascularized. They do not have blood flow like muscles, like a muscle body. What that means is if you tear or just have like a fracture within the tendon, it's not going to just grow back to how it was if you do nothing with it. You actually need to program the tenocytes, I believe they're called. They're basically a special type of fibroblast that creates tendons. You need them to be programmed to understand the type of force they're going to be enduring during their regrowth, their repair. So using an example, I have a peer-reviewed paper here. It's called Imbalances in Muscle and Tendon Strength in the Relation with Injuries and Performance by Bas van Hoorden, which is a translation of a Dutch sports science article, found that tendinous tissue is most effectively trained using high loads that induce high strain magnitudes. The most likely reason for this is just speculative, but I speculate once again that the tenocytes, or those special fibroblasts there, respond to the programming that this is the force that you're going to be undergoing. And they're going to, those fibroblasts will then create sufficiently strong or sufficiently amount of collagen or cartilage to rebuild properly the tendon. Using a racehorse as an example, if you have a fracture, let's say in a leg tendon, you have two horses that have the same leg tendon fracture. If one horse sits in a field and does nothing, a year later, nothing is going to happen. You cannot put him back on a track. He's going to perform like shit. The leg hasn't been reprogrammed to understand what it's going to be doing and how it's going to be performing. Has no programming. So if you have the second horse, and after a month or two of just small rehabilitation, you go ahead and you start getting him back into it. Obviously slower, a much more built routine based around making sure he's recovering properly after every exercise day or whatever, if he's on a corral or whatever. But no matter what, that tendon is going to likely, as long as he has sufficient amino acids in his blood, is like everything, he is going to absolutely regrow that tendon much more than a horse that has sat and done nothing except for standing in a field on it. It's the difference of programming versus nothing. It's basically making a I don't know, that's a horrible example. Anyway, in conclusion, the study found that taking 15 grams of gelatin in combination with vitamin C before training protocol led to an increase in collagen synthesis. This is most likely actually, my theory is gelatin is actually just boiled down cow. It's powdered cow. But basically another thing is it's concentrated. If you consume it, it's going to absorb in roughly 2 to 3 hours and maybe even quicker. It's going to be like protein powder. What that means is that the prior intake most likely increases the amount of proline and other cartilage and tendon creating amino acids in the blood, and then after work is performed, they have an abundance of those amino acids for specific cartilage growth. That's just my theory. But they did find using 18 individuals, I believe. Yes, 18 individuals with Achilles tendinopathy. They yielded better results with gelatin supplementation prior to exercising than a placebo group. So what this concludes is the right contents in your blood, protein synthesis, collagen synthesis, I can't speak for the life of me, are all sufficient with adequate diets. Although the only thing in most people aren't going to intake individually is going to be gelatin. You can buy it at Bulk Barn if you want. I don't recommend it. It tastes absolutely horrible. It tastes like powdered cow. And it's like sand. If you mix it in cold water, if you mix it in hot water, it becomes a ball of gloop. The protein content of gelatin is relatively high in the amino acids that are used for collagen synthesis. That is why blah blah blah. And if you ever hear of hydrolyzed collagen, it's most likely just gelatin broken down even further. And I don't understand what else hydrolyzed collagen could be besides further broken down gelatin. But I'm going to wrap up this video for today and say thank you, and if you actually made it to the end of this video, holy shit, I got quite a lisp. I appreciate that you spent the time watching this video. Don't you dare sub, don't you dare subscribe, and have a great day.